So today we are going to do a book talk on Salt to the Sea. As always, the beginning portion of this video is going to be spoiler free because that's how I like to start these. And if you decide this is a book that interests you, pause it, go read the book, and come back for the rest for the discussion down in the comment section below. This is my favorite way to do these because I think they're the most inclusive, in case anyone's wondering why I do this. But as far as like a general synopsis review for this book I think is a really interesting take on World War II. I love how you see a different perspective than just the like British versus German kind of like allies and enemies thing. Like I feel like that is something that as a North American we know, or at least I know very well, like I've heard a lot. That's the main point that they want to drive home. But what we don't hear a lot is like between the back end, like the Russians to the Germans. You don't hear a lot about that middle ground there, that there was also a lot of war-torn people and innocent people that got hit in that area. And that's just not something that is really spoken of, at least not like in high school. I never went to college, so I'm sure there's more like world history you could learn there. But as far as like my education stopping at high school went, that was never a side that we had heard of. Like this is not a story that I have ever heard before until reading this book. And I feel like the author did it in the most impactful way. I think if this was written in a different way, it wouldn't have hit home nearly as hard as this book did for me. So how to explain this book? It's written in 4 perspectives. You have Joanna, Florian, Amelia, and Alfred. And Alfred is a German soldier or a German sailor working on the Wilhelm Gustloff, which is a ship. And then the other 3 characters are intertwined throughout the story. I thought it was going to be more of like 4 perspectives converging at the end. It's more like 3 intertwined perspectives, and then they meet with the 4th character near the end of the book. I don't think that's a spoiler. That kind of just, if you're going into it knowing that, you'll be less jarred, I think. It's written only a few pages at a time from each perspective, so sometimes you get the same scene from the other side, which at first I thought was a bit jarring, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to think of it. And it's also, I feel like to me, it started off very intense, and I didn't know if that level of intensity could hold up through the entire book. But it honestly still had an amazing, impactful gut punch at the end. This was a very heart-wrenching book following a Polish girl, a Lithuanian girl, and I think the other 2 or 3 were just German or Prussian. I'm not exactly sure. I just finished this yesterday, but I can't remember exactly where everybody was from. But essentially, this is just a very heart-wrenching story following these characters and their hardships, and the only thing I felt jarring was like at the very, 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 very end, it jumps ahead in time and there's no warning about that. Like you kind of just figure it out as you're reading, and that part was the only part that I really didn't appreciate. Like I felt like I needed at least like a ... or like a page break or something, or like a 20 years later, something like that. Like that was just something that I think I wanted out of it. But honestly, it didn't take enough away from the story or take me out of the story far enough for me to drop it down to anything less than 5 stars. I think this is a really impactful book. I think it would be a really good read. And I am honestly interested in anyone who pauses here before the spoilers start, reads it, and comes back, because I would love to have a discussion down in the comment section. Anyway, I am going to go right into the spoiler section now because I need to get some things off my chest. When I first started this book, I was a little bit thrown. Like I thought it was going to be very disjointed. I guess what I thought was that this was going to be the story of 4 people, like 4 separate stories converging at the end. And if you've read Salt to the Sea, you know that the stories are actually overlapping, except for Alfred. Alfred is on his own, like, until closer to the end. But at first, when I realized that that's how it was going to be, I'm pretty sure I'd, messaged my friend, and I was like, this story started out really intense, but 1, I don't know if that intensity can keep up for an impactful ending for the whole story. And 2, the characters are all wound, so you see the same scene from sometimes multiple different perspectives. And At first, that was kind of jarring to me. And at first, I thought the writing was almost clinical, I guess. Like, it was very kind of dry or something. Like, I'm not exactly sure what I was feeling, but it was like there was something missing when I first started the book. And I think it was like, I thought there was a lack of emotion. But very quickly, I was hooked on the story, regardless of the writing style. I don't know what changed in my mind, but I feel like if this story had been written like your typical storytelling historical fiction, it wouldn't have been as impactful for me. Like, I think the way that she wrote it was purposeful, and I didn't, at the beginning, it was kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to think about this, because I don't know if she can keep this up and this, like, level of intrigue and interest up for the whole story. But honestly, I read the last 200 pages in a single day. Like, literally yesterday, I read 200 pages of this book. It's a fast read. Each chapter, if you will, each perspective is only, I think, at max 3 pages, which again, I thought was going to be really disjointed and jarring. But for me, it actually gave me enough. Like, it was what I wanted, what I was looking for. I loved the characters in these books. I loved all the perspectives. I especially loved Joanna's character, because you got to meet the poet and the little boy Klaus. And I mean, I didn't even like Eva, but near the end, when she comes to bring their stuff, because she waited for the cart, like, at first I just thought she was being really stupid and kind of callous, and like she just really like wanted her stuff. But the fact that she didn't just get her stuff, she brought everyone else's things as well, even though they were gonna just leave them. I appreciated that about her character. Like, I felt like that kind of redeemed her lack of filter, if you will. And so, like, I just didn't really like Eva. Obviously, she was written kind of that way, but in the end, I was like, okay, she's just kind of a harsh person who is very realistic in her thinking, and she just has no filter, but, like, she does have a heart. She clearly has a heart if she was going to, in the midst of all that chaos, bring everyone all their stuff. But I loved watching and just going through each character. I loved getting to know everyone, and I felt like even though the writing, it did stay kind of clinical, like it was very matter of fact, it hit hard, like it was quite a punch, and I think that this story is important because these are events that I feel like we, at least in North America, don't hear about. Like, no history class really that I've taken, and I mean, this was just high school, but in high school, we have to do Canadian history, and then we do American history, and there might be more, but I didn't take any more than that. But I feel like when it came to, like, World War II, you always hear about, like, the Allies versus Germany, but at least in my experience, in my high school experience, I never learned anything about, like, Germany with the Russians. Like, just recently, in actually a lot of historical fiction books, I've been piecing together more and more things about what actually happened between the Russians and Germany, because that end of things isn't really part of our history. Like, that wasn't really anything that we were taught about these other people. And I think what's really important about this story is that even though the German character, like Alfred, the, like, true German soldier character, even though he was written as a horrible person, I think that it still gave you a good perspective of how much everyone really suffered. Like, it wasn't like the war was only, like, it wasn't like Germany didn't suffer. Obviously, everyone suffered. It was a war, but a lot of times you hear that, like, yeah, started a war and then they lost it, but it was like you don't really hear about the suffering of the innocent people that were also there. There were casualties and innocents harmed on all fronts, on every single part. So there wasn't just, like, it wasn't like a single thing. I don't know if I'm getting my point across properly, but I feel like this book showed how much everyone suffered, essentially. And this was, like, a book that had nothing to do with, like, the American side or, like, the British. Like, this was solely between the Russians advancing from the other side of Germany. And it was about, like, how, like, the Poles were treated and all the other different, like, countries around there that were discriminated against. Like, it wasn't just one sect of people. Like, the Jews, obviously, the Holocaust, everything is absolutely horrible, but I think it's just interesting to hear further about all the other people who were also persecuted that you don't hear about quite as often. And I feel like Alfred's character, while he was written, I always appreciate a good German. Like, I appreciate when people write in a good German, but I feel like in this instance, his character just showed more so how easily some people are manipulated. I feel like with his mindset and his, like, ideals and wanting to get ahead and willing to throw anyone under the bus, I feel like that kind of showed how Hitler had such a strong following in his, like, immediate circle. There are just people who will do anything and are absolutely ruthless to get what they want, and they forget that we're all people. And I think Alfred's character showed that because he was willing to do anything to gain more power. And I feel like that's what Hitler did. He was willing to do anything to gain and keep more power. And I feel like his character, like Alfred's character, was oh man, he gave me the creeps. Like, he made me want to vomit every time I read his stories. Like, it got to the point where I wanted to skip his story because he was making me so angry. I didn't skip it because I knew I would miss stuff. But the second he started talking about Hannelore, I don't know if it was the first section or, like, the second, I just, like, I knew in my mind, I was like, she's gonna be a Jewish person. He's gonna get her killed. Like, because he never actually writes the letters, and he kept doing these inner monologues, and it was, like, all just made up, like, sociopathic shit. And it just, he made me sick. I hated him so much. Oh man, like, I feel like I enjoyed that this book gave me someone to hate. I didn't hate him because he was German. I mean, my entire, like, my husband's entire family is German, and they're amazing people, and I absolutely love them. I love German people. But in this book, I just hated him because he was a terrible person. I didn't hate him because of what he was or whatever. I just hated him for being a terrible person. Anyway, he was just such a gross person, and I couldn't stand him. But when you first start out and you follow each person, like, Joanna's guilt really got to me, and Florian was, like, I loved him. I was reading bad reviews about, like, why people didn't like this book, and I kind of can see their perspective from their point of view, but I just didn't see him the same way. I felt like, for the most part, he was trying to protect other people from his secret, because he had done something he didn't do anything really that awful, but he did something that if anybody else had known, he would have been putting other people in danger, and eventually he did kind of put people in danger, but, like, when he put Joanna in danger by, like, saying, like, falsifying that stuff, but the thing was, and he even pointed it out, she smuggled a Polish person onto a German boat, and that in itself would have gotten her killed back then. So, she had already put herself in danger. They were all in danger at this point. And just going through their stories, and I feel like the part when they meet up at the house that the shoe poets, like, that he knew the people from, and Florian stopped her from going upstairs, and he said no one should see that. And I, like, immediately guessed in my head, like, that's what was going on. And then when you hear about, like, what happened and, like, how it happened, it was just gut-wrenching. And then when I got to the end, I'm not even joking, I was between tearing up and just outright sobbing, like, shoulder-shaking sobbing for probably the last 50 pages of this book. Like, I couldn't breathe. I was so upset, and just so, like, the amount of emotion that this book took out of me, I have not had a book hangover this bad in a while. Like, I went to pick up a couple different books today, and I was like, no, I need to film this video. I need to get my thoughts out on here, because I have so many emotions, and this book broke me. It just broke me. And, like, the writing style at first, I was unsure if I was going to give it 4 stars or 5 stars. I thought it was going to be disjointed. I thought that Like, it was, to me anyway, it was so intense, and I was constantly waiting for something to happen, and I had, like, resigned myself to the fact that every single person that I knew and loved in this story was going to die. I just was expecting everyone to die. I didn't know anything about the Wilhelm Gustloff beforehand. I had no idea until, like, I knew it was based on, like, a true story, but I had never heard about that until I read this book. And I was like, how is she going to keep up this level of intensity throughout the entire book? Because I felt like I was constantly on edge waiting for something bad to happen. And then in the end, there was still a gut punch. Like, it was like, you've been on edge this whole book. Your nerves are shot. You know what? Here, I'm going to, like, it literally was like reading it reminded me of watching the end of Titanic, when she's explaining, like, how the people are falling off the ship and there's people jumping into the water and, like, the dead bodies, and all I'm picturing is, like, that scene at the end of the Titanic when everybody's dying, and it was, like, when they're running through the corridors, like, my heart was, like, pounding. I was so upset, and I was gutted when the shoe poet died. Like, I loved him. He was such a great side character. Ingrid, like, when she went through the ice, gutted me. It just was so good. I loved the story so much. Alfred was disgusting. Like, he just had such rapey vibes, especially when he wanted Joanna to go up on this promenade deck, and I'm like, don't do it, girl! Don't do it! He's gonna do something horrible to you! And thankfully that never happened, because I don't know if I could have handled it, but, like, this book, it was so good. And honestly, I'm kind of glad I put it off from November until now, because I have no doubts that this will end up in a favorites video at the end of 2019. It is just so good. And I was so immersed in the story, I really didn't want to get out of it too much. But there was a few things that I did like when the shoe poet says that the shoes always tell a story. And then he explains to Joanna what her shoes say about her, and he says, a mother sacrificed her boots for her daughter. That tells me you're loved, my dear, and your mother is not here, so that tells me you're sad. The shoes tell a story, and I know that maybe doesn't sound that impactful, but, like, in the story, it was like he could read people, and then when he saw Florian and he knew that something was up with his boots, and he said, your shoes always tell a story, like, he knew. He was just, like, he was so intuitive to people, and I loved him. I just thought he was a brilliant character. I loved him. And then when Amelia says, war had bled color from everything, leaving nothing but a storm of gray, and after I think this is when she was looking at her daughter, and she wanted to teach her daughter, like, about her past and her history. And then I think the last thing that I tabbed, and it's Florian, and he's talking to Heinz, and Heinz says, or the shoe poet, and he says, I spent 55 years with the love of my life, and I lost her last July. And then he gestured to Klaus, the little boy, and he says, just when you think this war has taken everything you loved, you meet someone and realize that somehow you still have more to give. And then Florian says, I know what you mean. And he says, I know. And she's worth it too. And he's talking about Joanna. And, like, I just loved this love story. I'm not into, like, romance as, like, a genre, because I can't handle that much. I feel like it gets overwhelming. But when they give me enough to fall, but not so much that I'm bored, I loved this. And at the end, when it says, and Florian was gone, and I was like, oh no, it's like the shoe poet, but then the next page, you realize he's not actually dead, and you're like, okay, like, oh my goodness, I had to set the book down for a second, like, I couldn't deal with it. Anyway, I think I'm going to end this here. I can't think of anything else I want to add, but I loved this book. It was truly a great experience. I highly recommend this to anyone who wants to see kind of a different perspective on World War II. I think this is really great, and if you have read it, and obviously if you're at this part of the video, you have probably read it, I would love to hear your thoughts down below, and I will talk to you all soon in my next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!